So the first thing that I technically try and get into as far as a conversation with real estate investors has mostly to do with the mindset as you're going into the investment process. Because it's easy to get caught up in a consumer mindset and thinking that you're getting ready to spend money and go into debt. And that gets one where they get caught up in how do they want to evaluate who they want to work with. So the first thing that I have to help you to come to a conclusion of is that you're no longer a consumer buying something, right? You're literally the CEO of a startup real estate investment firm. So when you consider the fact that every property that you buy is literally a business in a different area, then you have to consider who you're working with. Each area you're going to be introduced to various people across the country. And in those areas, they are the ones that are going to source, acquire, rehab, manage, and maintain your business. When you consider that, you literally have an operations division for free. Now, often people ask me, how is that free? When you think about it, you don't have an HR department, you don't have to have payroll, you don't have to have benefits, you don't have to have workman's comp. There's all these things you don't have to have, but yet you get all the experience of having a trusted staff on board. You have a management team that runs the business out there. You have a maintenance team. You have all this, and all it really is as far as an expense for you is the monthly management fee. When you think about that small percentage that you pay and you get all that included, you might as well be for free. Because it's easy to spend that same amount or less shopping around for a different property management company who will charge 1 or 2% less, and then you get a much worse experience. It's better to have the right people on board than to have the wrong people on board. I've heard some successful CEOs say what made them successful was they believed and agreed that they were the dumbest person in the boardroom. There's one guy I know who sold a technology company, has a lot of high-end vehicles, drives a different one every week. And this guy's truly the dumbest person in every room he walks into, but yet he understood the one thing, which is he needed to have the right people at the board table and the right people in the right positions. Now me here in this office, I'm applying for kind of like your fractional CFO job. The person who's going to give you financial, at least not really advice, but things to consider. I'm what they call a licensed loan originator. There's 300,000 people in the United States licensed to do what I do. And when you consider the average transactions that are done every year, the average person in our industry closes between 3 and 4 transactions per month. Right now we're in a refi boom. They may see 6, 7, 8 transactions. But that's for usually home buyers, people who buy a home to live in. Completely different consideration. And first-time home buyers, again, a whole different dynamic when it comes to trying to do that type of financing. Well, when you look at that type of resume, when a person comes to you and say they've been doing it for the last 5 or 10 years, or they got into it after the crash, and they do 5 or 6 transactions per month, well, what happens when you have a question about your business? You have a decision that you have to make. And you call the people that you're working with up and ask them their thoughts on it. They're going to speculate on that because they probably haven't experienced it. Now me, I've been doing this since 1997. My real estate investors, experience has been since 2003. I really started diving in to working with the real estate investor back in 2003, leading up to the crash. I got to see what took them through that process of the crash and the reasons that affected them. And then afterwards, in 2009, when they started working their way into Arizona, and 2010 and 2011, and started seeing how to build those businesses or the decisions that they made. And I've closed 707 transactions last year for real estate investors. 707. And I focus, again, on real estate investors. The year before that was 676. There is a website out there referred to the Scotsman Guide. And what they do is they keep statistics on people in my industry. Right now, when it comes to transactions closed last year, I'm ranked number 14 in the entire nation of those 300,000 people. The reason that's important is not me pounding my chest. This is me saying that I have seen a lot of decision-making skills at work. The questions you're going to face, the decisions you have to make about your business, I have seen a lot of people face the same things. And I've seen the decisions they've made, and I've seen the outcome. There's something I like to say a lot to people, and that's good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Now, that particular way of learning is not a big deal when you're talking about low stakes environment, like being in grade school. You walk up to the biggest guy and punch him in the nose, you learn it's not probably the smartest thing to do, because you learn from some pain how you should deal with people. But in this environment with real estate, the stakes are very high. You can't afford to make those kind of mistakes. You can't afford to learn that way. I have been blessed to see a lot of people make those mistakes. I've seen a lot of people make very, very good decisions. So when we talk about your business, we're not going to go into theory. We're not going to go into speculation. I'll give you practical data of where I've seen people make decisions. So that way you can navigate that decision with a little bit better information. Now, one of the things people like to ask me is, I hear that it's probably better to put more money down, or to buy down the interest rate, or to do a 15-year loan instead of a 30-year loan. What are the interest rate differences? I'm just here to tell you, quit that. That is a consumer mindset. I had theorized at one point that the longer you hold a loan, the longer you're making payments on it, the less you pay. It's completely counterintuitive. The eighth wonder of the world, which was coined by Einstein as being compound interest, says that the longer you're paying interest on money, the more you're going to pay, right? But we live in an inflationary environment. I know that the official numbers say we're around 2% inflation. But if you go to someplace called shadowstats.com, as in shadow statistics, or the Chapwood Index, and I'll put those up here in the show notes, and that will show you what the national average is as far as inflation is concerned by what people really spend their money on. And then also the Chapwood Index gets into the details of specific areas. I believe there's 50 different metropolitan cities, and it's showing some cities in double-digit inflation. We start looking at where people are really spending their money. Starbucks, going for entertainment, just day-to-day living, food costs, energy costs, taxes. Those are not factored into the CPI and the PCE, which is what the government uses as their main metric of inflation. So when you look at that and you see that we are seeing probably on a national average of 7% inflation and the dollar is declining at that rapid rate, the longer you take to pay it back, the less you actually pay. So the benefit of inflation is we get to raise rents as real estate investors to pace inflation. I say that because I have investment real estate. We're sitting in one right now. I own this particular building, but I get to lease it back to my firm. So that right there is another form of investment. Well, I have property in 5 states. And in those 5 states, we are seeing some rent raises on occasion. The national average is about 3.6% as I recall. Now this is something I looked up a few months ago and I have not reconfirmed it. But let's say it's 3% that you're going to go with for your particular business. And you bought a $100,000 property, you're renting it for $1,000 a month. We are all familiar with the 1% rent to value ratio. Well, if you raise it 3% the next year, you now raised it by $30. Now $30 is not overly sexy, but when you consider that if you had a cash flow of 200 year 1, then your cash flow went to 230 year 2, now you're looking at a 15% raise. Do the math on that. $30 divided into the 200 is 15%. A 15% gain on your cash flow. Now, if you're able to do that year over year, you're seeing a compound increase on your cash flow. But what's really awesome is to consider inflation and the dollar's devaluing on a regular basis. We're looking at the instrument you're paying the loan back with being worth less and less and less every time you pay that money towards it. For over 30 years, you may have borrowed $100,000 and you may be paying an interest somewhere in the range of about $170,000+ between principal and interest. I don't have those numbers readily in front of me. But when you factor in the value of the dollar, even a nominal 5% inflation rate, and compare that value of the dollar every time it left your hand to make a payment against that note, and then you compare it to the value of the dollar the day you borrowed it and how it's declining, over that 30 years, you're paying less than $100,000, probably $97,000, $98,000 at today's interest rates. And we're talking about October of 2019. So it's something to investigate a little bit more. I was speaking about that on a podcast, just my thought process and my theory behind it. And one of the listeners, who's a professor of accounting at Kennesaw State University, was listening in. He reached out to me. I'm scheduled to go speak to his students later this year, but he also started working with me on a way to actually prove this. So now we built a tool that illustrates this. So when we talk, when we have a conversation about your business, and we talk about the strategies associated with really the mindset about getting your business built, we can talk about those specific deals at the rates at that specific time and compare it with that tool on how much money you will make over the period of time of stretching out that payoff instead of cutting in half or trying to use your cash flow to pay it down. Don't ever do that. Use the cash flow to build your assets until you need them. Don't use the cash flow to pay down the note if you don't absolutely have to. Because when you do that, that's your money. That's your cash flow. That's your business that you're paying that back with. instead of using somebody else's money. So reach out to me. aaron.chapman.com is the best way to get to me. And then we can schedule a time to talk and go into greater detail about your particular scenario.